On the morning of October 15, 2024, Marcus Chen stood in his corner office, 57 floors above Manhattan, preparing for what he believed would be the most important business meeting of his life. The 34-year-old CEO of Chen Industries had built a renewable energy empire worth $4 billion, yet he was about to make a decision that would expose the one vulnerability he'd hidden from the world for 15 years. In exactly 3 hours, he would walk into Conference Room A of the Mandarin Oriental Hotel and agree to marry a complete stranger. The woman's name was Emiko Yamamoto, daughter of the most powerful business family in Japan. The marriage would seal a $2.8 billion merger and save 50,000 jobs. What Marcus didn't know, what no one in that room would know, was that 15 years earlier, he had held this same woman in his arms and whispered promises he thought he'd never have to keep. The security cameras would capture every moment of their first meeting in over a decade. The footage would later reveal the exact second when recognition hit them both. Marcus's hand freezing midway through shuffling his papers, Emiko's breath catching as she saw the face that had haunted her dreams. But what the cameras couldn't capture was the weight of 15 years of unanswered questions, the secrets that had torn them apart, and the dangerous game they were about to play with their hearts and their fortunes. This is the story of how a business arrangement became a reckoning with the past, and how two people discovered that some connections are too powerful to break, even when breaking them might be the only way to survive. Before we start this story, please like this video, subscribe and let us know where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Marcus Chen's morning routine that October day was identical to every other morning for the past 5 years. Espresso at 5:30 a.m., workout at 6 o'clock, reviewing quarterly reports by 6:45. His penthouse office overlooked Central Park, where early morning joggers traced the same paths he once ran as a struggling college student. Back then, he'd shared those runs with someone who made him believe that success meant nothing without love. Now, success was all he had left. Chen Industries had grown from a small solar panel startup to the third largest renewable energy company in North America. The financial press called him a visionary. Fortune magazine had featured him on their cover twice. But the numbers on his personal life told a different story. 0 meaningful relationships, 15 years of avoiding any woman who reminded him of the one who got away, and a genetic line that would end with him unless he took drastic action. His father's voice echoed in his mind from their last conversation before the cancer took him. Marcus, you've built an empire, but empires need heirs. The Yamamoto family understands tradition. Their daughter will give you what you need. What his father didn't say, but what Marcus understood, was that love was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not when 50,000 employees depended on his decisions, not when his company's future hung in the balance. At 11:47 a.m., Marcus Chen entered the private dining room of the Mandarin Oriental Hotel, where two families had gathered to orchestrate what the business world would later call the most strategic marriage of the decade. The Yamamoto delegation sat with military precision around the mahogany table. 3 generations of Japan's most influential business dynasty, each carrying the weight of a family empire built over 2 centuries. Marcus took his assigned seat, his attention fixed on the merger documents spread before him. The numbers were staggering. $2.8 billion, access to Asian markets worth another $15 billion, and the creation of the world's largest renewable energy consortium. His legal team had spent 6 months crafting every clause, every contingency. What they hadn't prepared him for was sitting directly across from him. Hiroshi Yamamoto, the family patriarch, spoke in measured English. "Allow me to present my daughter, Emiko. Harvard MBA, summa cum laude. She speaks 5 languages fluently and has spent the last 8 years restructuring our European operations." The old man's voice carried pride, but also calculation. "She understands the importance of strategic alliances." Marcus looked up from his papers for the first time since entering the room. The woman sitting across from him had dark hair pulled back in a perfect chignon, wearing a navy blue suit that spoke of boardrooms and power lunches. Her posture was flawless, her expression professionally neutral. But when their eyes met, Marcus saw something that made his world tilt on its axis. Those eyes. Brown with flecks of gold, exactly like the ones that had looked at him with love 15 years ago in a cramped college dorm room. Emma Rodriguez. The girl who had vanished from Columbia University without a trace during their sophomore year, leaving behind only a hastily scrawled note that said, "I'm sorry. Please don't look for me." The girl who had been his first love, his study partner, his future, until she became his greatest mystery. Now she sat across from him as Emiko Yamamoto, heir to a business empire, and according to the documents in front of him, his intended bride. Security footage from that meeting, later obtained by investigators, would show Marcus Chen's hand stopping mid-reach for his water glass. The timestamp reads 11:52 and 37 seconds a.m. For exactly 13 seconds, neither Marcus nor the woman calling herself Emiko moved. The other people in the room continued their negotiations, oblivious to the silent earthquake happening across the table. Emiko's training in corporate negotiations had prepared her for hostile takeovers, cultural barriers, and billion-dollar decisions. It had not prepared her for this moment. The boy who had taught her to love Shakespeare, who had held her during panic attacks about her family's financial struggles, who had promised to wait for her no matter what. He was now the most powerful renewable energy executive in America, and he was staring at her with the same intensity that had once made her believe in forever. The conversation around them continued. Legal terms were discussed. Financial projections were reviewed. Marriage arrangements were negotiated like any other business contract. But beneath the table, Emma, now Emiko, pressed her nails into her palms hard enough to leave marks, a technique she'd learned to maintain composure during the most challenging board meetings of her career. Marcus found his voice first, though it took considerable effort. "Ms. Yamamoto, I look forward to discussing the details of our partnership." The word partnership carried weight that no one else in the room could understand. "As do I, Mr. Chen." Her voice was steady, professional, giving away nothing. But when she reached for her own water glass, Marcus noticed her hand trembled slightly. Some things, it seemed, couldn't be trained out of a person. The formal meeting concluded at 12:45 p.m. with handshakes and bows, scheduling another session for the following week. As the families dispersed, Marcus found himself alone in the hotel corridor with the woman he'd once known as Emma Rodriguez. The silence stretched between them like a chasm filled with 15 years of unanswered questions. "Marcus." She said his name like she was testing whether it still fit in her mouth. "Emma." He said hers like a prayer he'd forgotten he knew. "It's Emiko now. Emiko Yamamoto. Has been for 12 years. Her voice carried an accent that hadn't been there in college. Cultured, international, the kind that came from boardrooms in Tokyo and London. "What happened to you?" The question escaped before he could stop it. "You just disappeared. Your roommate said your family had an emergency, but when I tried to call, the number was disconnected." "I know." She looked away, toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased Manhattan's skyline. "My family didn't just have an emergency, Marcus. We lost everything. The house, the business, everything. My father's business partner embezzled $2 million and disappeared. We had nothing left." The Emma he'd known had been proud, fiercely independent despite her family's struggles. She'd worked 3 jobs to pay for college, studied until 2 a.m. every night, and still found time to laugh at his terrible jokes. The woman standing before him now carried that same strength, but it had been refined, polished into something that could command respect in the most powerful boardrooms in the world. "The Yamamoto family took me in when I had nowhere else to go. They gave me a name, an education, a future. In return, I've given them everything I have." She finally looked at him again. "Including this. So we're really going to do this?" Marcus's statement wasn't a question. "We're going to get married. For our families. For the business. For 50,000 employees who need this merger to succeed." Emiko's voice was steady, but Marcus caught the slight emphasis on certain words, the same emphasis Emma used to place when she was trying to convince herself of something she wasn't sure she believed. They stood in that corridor for another 10 minutes, 2 people who had once shared everything now negotiating the boundaries of a relationship that would be built on everything except honesty. The security cameras captured their conversation, but not the weight of what they weren't saying. "1 year, Marcus said finally. "We fulfill our obligations to our families, secure the merger, and then, Then we get a quiet divorce and go back to our separate lives. Emiko finished the thought. It's just business. But as they shook hands to seal their agreement, a handshake that lasted 3 seconds longer than necessary, both of them knew they were lying. Some connections run too deep to be filed away under just business. Some memories are too powerful to be contained by contracts and corporate structures. What neither of them realized was that Hiroshi Yamamoto was watching from the hotel lobby, and the smile on his face suggested that this reunion was far from accidental. The engagement would be announced in the Wall Street Journal exactly 72 hours later. But what the newspaper couldn't report was that the bride and groom were about to discover that some secrets have a way of refusing to stay buried, and that the people who orchestrated their meeting had been playing a much longer game than anyone imagined. The Wall Street Journal headline on October 18, 2024, read, Chen Industries CEO to marry Yamamoto heiress in merger of hearts and billions. The announcement sent shockwaves through the business world, but it was the photograph accompanying the article that told the real story. Marcus and Emiko stood together outside the New York Stock Exchange, her hand resting lightly on his arm. To the casual observer, they looked like the perfect power couple. But body language experts would later note the tension in their postures, the way they both seemed to be holding their breath. Within hours, the engagement became the most talked about business story of the year. CNBC dedicated an entire segment to analyzing the strategic implications. Forbes published a piece titled, The $4 Billion Love Story. Social media exploded with speculation about the speed of the engagement and the obvious chemistry between the couple. What none of the analysts could have known was that Marcus and Emiko had spent the 3 days since their agreement avoiding each other completely. Marcus had thrown himself into work with an intensity that concerned even his most driven employees. 18-hour days became 20-hour days. Board meetings that should have lasted 2 hours stretched to 4. His assistant, Sarah, who had worked with him for 8 years, later told investigators that she had never seen him so focused and so distracted at the same time. Emiko, meanwhile, had returned to her family's estate in the Hamptons, where she spent hours walking the grounds she had come to call home over the past 12 years. The Yamamoto family had rescued her from poverty, given her opportunities she could never have imagined, and loved her as their own daughter. The debt she owed them was immeasurable, and she had never questioned paying it, until now. The Lincoln Center Gala for Renewable Energy Innovation was scheduled for October 25. It would be Marcus and Emiko's first public appearance as an engaged couple, and the press attention was unprecedented. Security footage from that evening reveals a couple who had clearly spent time preparing for their performance. They moved together with practiced ease, Marcus's hand guiding Emiko through the crowd, her smile perfectly calibrated for the cameras. But the real story was happening in the moments between the photographs. During the cocktail hour, while Marcus spoke with potential investors, Emiko found herself in conversation with Dr. Sarah Chen, Marcus's younger sister and a prominent environmental scientist. The conversation, captured by a documentary crew filming the gala, would later prove significant. "I've never seen my brother this nervous," Sarah remarked, watching Marcus adjust his tie for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. "He's usually unshakable at these events." "Perhaps he's simply concerned about the merger," Emiko replied, her voice carefully neutral. "Maybe. Or maybe he's finally found someone who matters more than quarterly reports." Sarah's eyes were shrewd. "You know, he dated a girl in college. Emma something. Never got over her, as far as I could tell. Spent years looking for someone who could measure up." The camera captured the moment Emiko's composure wavered, just for a fraction of a second, but enough to reveal the truth to anyone who knew what to look for. Sarah Chen, it turned out, knew exactly what to look for. The evening's keynote speech was delivered by Marcus, who spoke about the future of renewable energy and the importance of strategic partnerships. But when he mentioned the power of second chances, his eyes found Emiko in the audience. The applause that followed was thunderous, but neither of them was listening anymore. The conversation that changed everything happened 3 days later, in the unlikely setting of Marcus's corporate kitchen at 11:30 p.m. Both had been working late, Marcus on merger documents, Emiko on integration strategies for the Asian markets. They found themselves alone, surrounded by empty coffee cups and the detritus of another 18-hour day. Do you remember the night we stayed up until dawn working on Professor Hamilton's economics paper? Marcus asked, breaking a silence that had stretched for 20 minutes. Emiko looked up from her laptop. You mean the night you convinced me that Adam Smith was secretly a romantic because he believed in the invisible hand bringing people together? You called it the most ridiculous economic theory you'd ever heard. I still do. But she was smiling now, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her since their reunion. You got a B- on that paper. Worth it. You laughed for the first time since your father's restaurant closed down. The mention of her family's restaurant shifted something in the room. Emiko, had never told him the full story of what happened after she left Columbia. Now, in the quiet of the empty office, she began to speak. The embezzlement was just the beginning, she said. After Rodriguez's cafe closed, we lost the house. My mother had a breakdown. My father, he blamed himself, started drinking. Within 6 months, we were living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Queens, and I was working 4 jobs just to keep us afloat. Marcus listened without interrupting, understanding finally why she had disappeared so completely. I couldn't drag you into that, she continued. You were destined for this, she gestured around the office, and I was drowning, so I made a choice. I let you go so you could become who you were meant to be. And the Yamamoto family? Found me working at a Japanese restaurant in Flushing. Hiroshi-san was there with business associates. I was serving their table, and I spoke to them in Japanese. I'd been teaching myself from library books. He was impressed by my determination to learn, to better myself despite my circumstances. She paused. He offered me something I couldn't refuse, a chance to become someone new. What Emiko didn't tell Marcus that night was the full extent of her transformation. The security files that would later be uncovered revealed that Emma Rodriguez had legally died in a car accident in New Jersey in 2012, an accident that never happened. The Yamamoto family had arranged for a new identity, a new life, and a new purpose for the broken young woman they had rescued. But the past has a way of surfacing, especially when powerful people have powerful enemies. Victoria Sterling, Marcus's former fiancée from 3 years earlier, had returned from her European business ventures with one goal, reclaiming the man she believed belonged to her. Victoria had resources, connections, and a ruthless determination that had made her one of the youngest hedge fund managers on Wall Street. Her investigation into Emiko Yamamoto began the day after the engagement announcement. What she discovered would threaten not just the merger, but the carefully constructed life that Emiko had built over 12 years. The first hint of trouble came in the form of a phone call to Marcus's private line at 2:47 a.m. on November 2nd. The caller ID showed Victoria's number. Marcus, darling, I hope I'm not calling too late. I've just returned from Tokyo, and I've learned the most interesting things about your little bride-to-be. Marcus had hung up without responding, but the damage was done. Victoria Sterling had never been one to make empty threats, and she had just declared war on the most important business deal of his career, and possibly the most important relationship of his life. Despite the looming threat, or perhaps because of it, Marcus and Emiko found themselves spending more time together. What had begun as strategic planning sessions for the merger became something deeper. They discovered that 15 years had changed them both, but the fundamental connection that had drawn them together in college remained. Late-night strategy sessions turned into conversations about their dreams, their fears, and the paths their lives had taken. Marcus learned that Emiko had never married, had never found anyone who could compete with a memory she thought she'd buried. Emiko discovered that Marcus's string of failed relationships had all ended the same way, with women who complained that he was comparing them to someone from his past. The turning point came during a site visit to Chen Industries' new solar installation in New Jersey. Standing in a field of photovoltaic panels that stretched to the horizon, Emiko asked the question that had been haunting her for weeks. Do you think we're making a mistake? Trying to build something real on a foundation of business arrangements and family obligations. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching the sunset reflect off thousands of solar panels. I think, he said finally, That we're two people who got a second chance that most people never get. The question is, are we brave enough to take it? That night, in the car driving back to Manhattan, Emiko reached across the center console and took Marcus's hand. It was the first time they had touched as themselves, not as CEO and heiress, not as strategic partners, but as Emma and Marcus, two people who had loved each other once and were beginning to wonder if they could love each other again. But Victoria Sterling had been busy during their moment of connection, and the information she had uncovered about Emma Rodriguez's transformation into Emiko Yamamoto would threaten to destroy everything they were building, and expose secrets that powerful people had killed to protect. Victoria Sterling's resources were extensive, but what made her truly dangerous was her patience. For 3 weeks after her late-night call to Marcus, she remained silent, allowing the engaged couple to believe they were safe while she methodically dismantled 12 years of carefully constructed lies. Her first breakthrough came through an unlikely source: immigration records. Emma Rodriguez had entered the United States on a student visa in 2007. That same Emma Rodriguez had supposedly died in a car accident in New Jersey in 2012. But the death certificate, when examined by Victoria's team of forensic accountants, contained irregularities that pointed to deliberate falsification. The second breakthrough was more damaging. Financial records showed that in 2012, the same year Emma Rodriguez died, the Yamamoto family had made a series of unusual payments to a law firm specializing in identity transformation, services typically used by witnesses in federal protection programs or by individuals seeking to escape dangerous situations. But it was the third discovery that would prove explosive. In 2011, 1 year before Emma's transformation, Rodriguez's Café, the restaurant that had supposedly been destroyed by embezzlement, had been the site of a money laundering operation for the Kozlov crime family. Emma's father, Miguel Rodriguez, hadn't been a victim of embezzlement. He had been a witness to federal crimes, and his daughter had been marked for elimination. Victoria's investigation revealed that Emma Rodriguez hadn't chosen to disappear. She had been disappeared, hidden away by the Yamamoto family at the request of federal authorities who needed to keep her alive until she could testify. The engagement, the merger, everything that had brought Marcus and Emma back together, had been orchestrated by people playing a much more dangerous game than corporate strategy. The call came to Marcus's private line at 7:22 a.m. on November 15th, exactly 1 month before the scheduled wedding. Victoria's voice was calm, professional, deadly. "Marcus, I think it's time we had a conversation about your fiancé's real identity. Meet me at the plaza, Oak Room, 1 hour. Come alone, and bring your checkbook, because the information I have is going to cost you everything you think you're about to gain." Marcus found Victoria exactly where she said she'd be, sitting at a corner table with a leather portfolio that would change his life forever. She looked exactly as she had 3 years earlier when their relationship ended: beautiful, calculating, and absolutely ruthless. "Emma Rodriguez," Victoria began without preamble, sliding a photograph across the table. It showed a younger Emma, working at Rodriguez's Café, smiling at the camera with the innocence of someone who had no idea what was coming. Daughter of Miguel Rodriguez, who was murdered by the Kozlov family in 2013, 1 year after his daughter was supposed to have died in that convenient car accident. Marcus studied the documents Victoria spread before him: financial records, immigration files, FBI surveillance photos. Each piece of evidence was more damaging than the last. "Your beloved Emma isn't just hiding from a difficult past, Marcus. She's hiding from the Russian mob, and she's been using the Yamamoto family as protection for 12 years. The question you need to ask yourself is, what happens when they find out where she is?" The final document Victoria placed on the table was a copy of a federal witness protection file, heavily redacted but with Emma's photograph clearly visible. The case number referenced Operation Cleanup, a multi-year investigation into Russian money laundering operations in New York. The merger you're so excited about? It's not about renewable energy, darling. It's about giving Emma Rodriguez Yamamoto permanent protected status through marriage to one of the most powerful men in America. You're not getting a wife, Marcus. You're getting a target painted on your back. Marcus confronted Emiko that same evening in his penthouse office. The city sparkled below them, 47 floors of separation from the world that was about to collapse around them. He placed Victoria's evidence on his desk and waited. Emiko's reaction told him everything he needed to know. She didn't deny the documents. She didn't express surprise or outrage. She simply sat down in the chair across from his desk and began to speak with the calm precision of someone who had been preparing for this moment for 12 years. "My father wasn't just a restaurant owner," she said. "He was recruited by the Kozlov family to launder money through the cafe. Small amounts at first, they told him it was just helping friends avoid taxes. By the time he realized what he was really doing, they owned him completely." She stood and walked to the windows, her reflection ghost-like against the Manhattan skyline. "The night I left Columbia, my father called me. He was terrified. He'd been secretly recording his conversations with Kozlov's people, planning to turn the evidence over to the FBI. But they found out. They killed his business partner first, made it look like embezzlement. Then they came for my father." Marcus listened without interrupting, finally understanding the magnitude of what had been hidden from him. "The Yamamoto family has connections throughout the federal law enforcement system. They arranged for my death, gave me a new identity, and kept me safe while my father prepared to testify. But he never got the chance. They found him in 2013, made it look like a heart attack. The only thing that kept me alive was that I was already dead." She turned back to face him, and Marcus saw the woman he had fallen in love with in college. Brave, determined, carrying impossible burdens with quiet strength. "The merger isn't just about business, Marcus. It's about legitimacy. Marriage to you would give me legal protections that even the Yamamoto family can't provide. It would make me untouchable." She paused. "But it would also make you a target." Marcus stood in his office for 20 minutes after Emiko left, staring at the evidence scattered across his desk. Everything he thought he knew about their reunion, about the merger, about their second chance at love, had been built on a foundation of lies and federal protection programs. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "She's not the only one in danger now. They know where she is. Victoria Sterling had done more than uncover Emma's secret identity. She had exposed the location of a federal witness to the very people who wanted her dead. In her obsession with reclaiming Marcus, she had potentially signed Emma's death warrant. The next text message came from Emiko. "I'm leaving tonight. Don't try to find me. This was always going to end this way. I'm sorry I dragged you into this. I love you. I always have." Marcus made his choice in that moment. He had built an empire by taking calculated risks, by betting everything on outcomes others considered impossible. Now he was about to make the biggest gamble of his life, not for money or power, but for love and the chance to protect the one person who had ever truly mattered to him. He called his head of security, activated emergency protocols that would make his building a fortress, and sent a message to Emiko's phone. "We finish this together. You're not running again, and I'm not letting you go. Trust me." What Marcus didn't know was that Victoria Sterling's revenge had already set deadly events in motion. At that very moment, Dmitry Kozlov was boarding a flight from Moscow to New York, carrying with him 12 years of pent-up rage and a debt that could only be paid in blood. The wedding scheduled for December 15th would either be a celebration of love conquering all, or the final chapter in a story that began with betrayal and money laundering in a small restaurant in Queens. 6 months later. Chen Yamamoto merger successful, both companies thriving. Marcus and Emiko as equal partners in business and life. Show their home, blend of cultures, filled with laughter. Emiko pregnant, both excited about the future. The lesson. Marcus voiceover. Sometimes the best business decisions are made with your heart. Emiko's addition. And sometimes what looks like an ending is really a beginning. Final scene. Teaching their business ethics class together at their old university. Love stories aren't always fairy tales, sometimes they're second chances. What would you do if fate gave you another opportunity with your first love? Subscribe for more stories about love, loss, and the courage to try again.